So we're talking about Kiddush al Yayin. And the main issue is going to be the following. Does the Torah require that Kiddush, Zochres Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsho, be al Yayin? Or does the Torah require just Amira, and then Yayin is a D'Rabbanan? So we're going to look into some of the major source material. We start with the Gemara Psachim Adaf Kuf Vav, Tana Rabbanan, and the Gemara says Zochres Yom HaShabbos, and the Gemara derives from this pasuk Zochreu al Yayin. And the simple reading of the Gemara seems to indicate that in order to fulfill the mitzvah of Zochres Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsho, you must recite Kiddush al Yayin. The Brisa continues and derives a second Kiddush, which is by Yom, from the pasuk Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsho. So Ikar Kiddusha B'Layla, the Gemara establishes, the main Kiddush is at night. However, the Torah also requires Kiddush by Yom. Now the question here is whether or not Zochreu al Yayin is an asmachta d'Rabbanan or it's a doraisa. When we look at Tosfos, Dibra Maskil Zochreu al Yayin, Tosfos seems to wonder, where does it say in the Torah that you require Yayin? And Tosfos quotes two psukim in Tanakh, one from Hosea Novi, the other from Shir Hashirim, and both of these psukim indicate that Zchira is on Yayin. For example, in Hosea, it says, Zichru ki Yayin Levanon. And in Shir Hashirim, it says, Nazkira dodecha miyayin. So it means that the word Zechira refers to Kiddush, and the Torah requires Yayin. So the simple pshat here is that Yayin is a requirement min Torah. Now later on we'll have to raise the following question. What does that mean? The Kiddush is recited all Yayin, and Shtia is a separate mitzvah. We'll see what that means. Or no, Kiddush al Yayin means you have to drink from the Yayin. It's not just a formality and a ceremony of reciting Kiddush al Yayin, but you're required to drink from the Yayin. In any event, when you look at Tosfos carefully, he says that Nira de Kiddush al Yayin asmachtahi, that we are not requiring Yayin as a doraisa, but rather al Yayin lo havya elamid rabbanon. So although at the beginning of Tosfos, you get the impression from the two psukim that he quotes that he's establishing that Kiddush al Yayin is doraisa, but then Tosfos takes another path and he says no, that Kiddush al Yayin is only d'Rabbanan, and the Torah requires Kiddush without Yayin. And then he quotes a Gemara at the beginning of Nazir on Daf Gimel Amid Beis. Now let's take a look at the Gemara in Nazir, which you have here in your Kuntras. The Gemara says the following, that when a person takes upon himself Nazirus, he's required to abstain from Yayin. And what happens in the case of Yayin Shel Mitzvah? The Gemara has a pasuk, Yayin v'shecher yazir. And that pasuk has a special ribui to include Yayin Shel Mitzvah, which means that the Nazir is enjoined not only from Yayin Dereshus, but even from Yayin Shel Mitzvah. And the Gemara asks on the bottom of Gimel Amid Beis, Maihi, what is Yayin Shel Mitzvah? And the Gemara answers, Kiddush of Avdalta. That Yayin Shel Mitzvah refers to Kiddush and Avdallah. So if you move on to Daf Daled Amid Aleph, the Gemara asks, Harei Mushpa v'Yomid Mar Sinai. And on Nazir, we don't have Rashi, but we have what's called the Mefaresh. And you look in the Mefaresh, and he says, Dichsiv, why is he mushba v'yomid mar Sinai to drink the wine of Kiddush? Because it says, Zachar Yom HaShabbos l'kadshel, Zachar el hayayin. And Eli el b'knisaso, v'yitziasu minayin. And we have a special ribui for Yayin Shel Avdol. Says the Mefaresh, on Daf Daled Omen Aleph, v'kaim alon de nishba levatel as ha-mitzvah, potter, d'lo asya shvua u'mevatel ha-mitzvah. So his neder of Nazirus cannot override the mitzvah that was mushba v'yomid mar Sinai. So clearly the Mefarish understood that the requirement of yayin in Kiddush is doraisa. And therefore the Gemara's question is very justified. Mushba v'yomid mar Sinai. It's impossible that he could take a neder, and that neder could undermine a mitzvah doraisa. In this case, yayin shel Kiddush. Now, from this Mefarish, we derive two conclusions. Number one, that yayin for Kiddush is doraisa. That's a requirement that's implicit in the word Zachar Yom HaShabbos l'kadshel. Number two, it's not just to make the Kiddush ala yayin, but it's to drink the cup of wine. Hence, the neder of Nazirus cannot override the mitzvah of drinking wine of Kiddush. However, when you take a look at Tosfos quotes Rabbeinu Tam, and Rabbeinu Tam reads the Gemara differently. And he says, Garcinin bitmia. We have to add a question mark to the Gemara. V'chi mushba v'yomi marsinayu. In other words, do we need a pasuk to tell me that the Nazir is enjoined from drinking wine of Kiddush? Is yayin of Kiddush a requirement in Torah? For sure not. So why do I need a pasuk and a drush and a ribui to tell me that the Iser of Shtiyas Yain for Nazir applies even to Kiddush? The whole institution of Yain and Kiddush is all D'Rabbanan. So whereas at the beginning of Tosfos, he doesn't read it with a bitmiyah, he reads it the way the Mefarish learns it, the Kiddush Hayom Doraisa, Ve'ech Tachel Ol of Nazirus. And then Tosfos goes on to prove that no, Kiddush al Yayin is only the Rabbanan. And the pasuk of Zochres Yom HaShabbos l'kadshel, Zocher el Yayin, is only an asmachta. Hence, we have to read it the way Rabbeinu Tam reads it. That Mushpa v'yom mar Sinai is a question, bitmiyah. So we now have two shitos. We have the shita of Tosfos at the beginning of Tosfos and Psachim, and Tosfos at the beginning of Nazir, and the Mefarish. All of the above agree that the Torah requires Kiddush al Yayin. On the other hand, we have Rabbeinu Tam, who insists that Kiddush al Yayin is only D'Rabbanan. And the pasuk is only an asmachta. Now, if you look at Rashi in Masechta Brachos on Daf Chaf Amud Beis, Dibra Maskil Kiddush Hayom, which is about 15 lines down from the top of Chaf Amud Beis in Brachos, Rashi says, Kiddush Hayom Zachar es Yom Shabbos l'kadshel Zachar el hayayin. And that comment of Rashi is going on the Gemara that says that Kiddush Hayom is Doraisa, and Rashi says Al Yayin. It seems clearly that Rashi in Masechta Brachos holds like the Mefarish and like the first day in Tosfos that Kiddush Yayin is Doraisa. Now again, you can't prove 100% from Rashi that you have to drink the kos of yayin. Rashi is just talking about reciting the kiddush on a kos of yayin. And in fact, if you take a look at Tosfos that we started with today in Psachim on Kuf Vav, Dibra Maskil Zochreu, you will see that Tosfos, with regard to Kiddush al Yayin, has two approaches. First approach is that Kiddush al Yayin is only D'Rabbanan Kras Machta B'Almahu. But then Tosfos says that the obligation of Kiddush al Hakos is the Oraisa, but the Te'ima min Hakos is only D'Rabbanan. So we now have three shittas in front of us. We have one shitta that says Kiddush al Yayin min HaTorah, which means he has to drink the wine. That's the Mefarish in Nazir. We have the opinion of Tosfos in Nazir and Tosfos in Psachim that Kiddush al Hakos is only D'Rabbanan. And then in the middle, between the two, we have the opinion of Tosfos in Psachim in his second Mahalach that Kiddush al Yayin is D'Oraisa, but you don't have a Chiyuv min HaTorah to drink the kos of Yayin. The Te'ima itself is a separate entity, which is D'Rabbanan. Why would the Rabbanan require Te'ima if the Torah, from the Torah perspective, it's sufficient to make the Kiddush al Yayin without Te'ima? Perhaps the answer is what's called Kavod HaKos. This is a din in Kos Shel Bracha. Whenever you recite a Bracha al Kos, it transforms the Kos itself to a Kos Shel Bracha. And hence, it's Kavod to a Kos Shel Bracha to drink from the Kos. So the drinking of the kos is not a din and a requirement in the bracha and the kiddush, but rather it's a din in the kos. Once you've made a bracha on the kos, now you're required to drink from the kos. I would put it this way. The kos of yayin has a personality of being of its own, and it cries out, drink me. It wants that the kos should be drunk. And in Mirz Hashem, I don't know if we'll get to it today, but at some point we have to discuss who has to drink from the kos. Is it the Makadesh? Is it somebody else? Is it Moli Lugmov? How much does he have to drink? Is Shdios Mitzarfos? Can each person at the table drink a part of Moli Lugmov, and will Mitzarif will join it all together? What is the requirement of Te'ima min HaKos? That's a topic unto itself. So again, as we said in summary, we have three shittos. Now we're going to look at the Gemara of Rav Bruna and Rav Huna in Psachim Daf Kuvav, and the Rashbam in Psachim Kuvav. Now, this Gemara begins on Kuvav Amid Aleph, on the last line of the Amud, and goes on to Kuvav Amid Beis, which you have here in the Kuntrus. So the Gemara tells the following: Amar Rav Bruna, Amar Rav. And now we turn to Kuvav Amid Beis. Hanotel Yadav. The man washed his hands, and as we'll see in the Rashbam, he made a bracha on Netilas Yadayim before Kiddush. Normally, we recite Kiddush, and then straight afterwards, we go ahead and we wash our hands. But he was makdim es hama'uchar, and he began by washing his hands. And Rav Bruna, in the name of Rav, says, Lo Yekadesh. What does that mean, Lo Yekadesh? Does it mean he forfeits the mitzvah of Kiddush because he washed his hands? That doesn't seem to make any sense. So we're going to learn the Rashbam on this sugya. The Rashbam understands Lo Yekadesh means that the one who washed his hands should not be reciting Kiddush, but rather Ella Acher Yekadesh. Let someone else recite the Kiddush. Vehu Yetze Yedecho Vasa B'Shmiya. He'll fulfill his obligation of Kiddush by listening to someone else. And why is that? The ein kan hesech hadas me'achar shu atzmo einu mevarech. Aval hu atzmo lo yikadish and not al yodov kedei sheyochal al smach netila shelifnei kiddush The Kiddush mafzik bein netila lachila. V'havi kehesech hadas uboy netila achrina. Basar Kiddusha, the takef l'netilas yadayim seuda. So Rashbam has a whole presentation here, and perhaps we could summarize the Rashbam's understanding of this sugya in the following way. The Rashbam holds that this halacha of takef l'netila achila, which means that you need a mitzaref that links up the netilas yadayim with the achila of the pas, of the lechem, of the suda. Here we have a problem because Kiddush, after netilas yadayim, before achila, is going to wedge between the netilas yadayim and the achila, and therefore it won't be takef l'netila achila. So that's called a hefsek, otherwise known as a hesech hadas. And the Rashbam insists that this halach of hesech hadas only applies if he himself, that means the one who is notel yadav, goes ahead and recites Kiddush. If on the other hand he silently listens to someone else's Kiddush, that's not called hesech hadas. In other words, as long as he's not enunciating the Kiddush, he can hold cup, as we say in Yiddish, meaning he has both in mind the netilas yadayim, which should culminate with the achila, and he has in mind Kiddush. But since he never expressed the Kiddush, then it's not a hesech hadas. If he would recite the Kiddush, that requires his full 100% concentration on the Kiddush, and therefore he is now discontinued his awareness of the netilas yadayim that leads to Suda. But if he's not totally focused on the Kiddush, he's just going to be Yotze through Shomea Ka'ona when someone else recites the Kiddush, then he can still maintain, his anticipation of Achila. And now the netilas yadayim is, so to speak, up there on the board, it's floating in airspace, and it'll land with his Achila. And the fact that in the middle he listened to someone else's Kiddush, that doesn't qualify as a hesech hadas. Very, very, shall we say, sensitive, nuanced Rashbam over here.
Rabbi, we have during Sukkot, some people have the minhag of washing and then going into the sukkah and making Kiddush and then making motzi, because otherwise they would make Kiddush and then have to get up and leave the sukkah to go wash and come back. How does that play into it?
Yeah, I don't know. That would not fit with the Rashbam. The Rashbam would certainly object to such a minhag because the Kiddush itself is a hefsek between the netilas yadayim and the Suda. As I state, that's what it says here in this Rashbam. So your minhag might fulfill a different shita. We'll see. There'll be other shitas than the Rashbam, but the Rashbam could not accept such a thing. Now, I just want to point out that this Rashbam reminds us, by sheer association, of a famous machlokas between Rashi and Tosfos in Masechta Brachos about a person who, in the middle of his what we call Shtila Shmon Esrei, his Tefillah B'Lachash, the shots is up to Kiddusha. And the Rishonim want to know, what should he do? On the one hand, he can't recite Kiddusha because he's in the middle of his Shmon Esrei. On the other hand, he also want to forfeit the mitzvah of Kiddusha. And therefore, according to the sheet of Rashi, he should silently listen to the Kiddusha, and then after the shots finishes Kiddusha, he should continue in his Shmon Esrei. Tosfos raises the following objection. If you're telling me Shomea Ka'ona by listening to someone else's Kiddusha, it's as if he himself recited the Kiddusha, then we're back to square one, meaning once again, it's going to be a hefsek. But apparently Rashi felt that there are different levels of hefsek. One level is acceptable, and one level is a full-fledged hefsek, and it's not acceptable. So from Rashi's perspective, the fact that he's not enunciating the Kedusha, but he's just listening to someone else's Kedusha, he's allowed to maintain his continuity of his Shmon Esrei. It's not a full-fledged Hesech Hadas. We'll call it a partial Hesech Hadas. He's a little bit distracted, but not totally distracted. That Shita really reflects and resonates in this Rashbam that we're learning now, that if he washed his hands with Tils Yadayim, and now he would recite Kiddush, that would be Hefsek Hadas between Netila and Suda. But if he listens to someone else's Kiddush, that's not a full-fledged Hesek Hadas, and therefore he could be Mitzaref his Netils Yadayim to the Achilas HaSu'uda. But basically, according to the Rashbam's understanding, the entire sugi that we're learning here of Rav Bruna in the name of Rav revolves around the issue of Hefsek. And basically, since he washed his hands and he made a bracha al Netils Yadayim, it's not that he's lazy and he doesn't want to start again from scratch and do an Netils Yadayim a second time. He's not lazy. He has water. He can do that. But he's going to lose the bracha. It means that the bracha that he recited on the Netils Yadayim before Kiddush is going to become a bracha of Atola. Why? Because then he recites Kiddush, and that's a hefsek to the Seudah, and that disqualifies his Netils Yadayim. He's got to make another Netils Yadayim. So this whole sugya really is an attempt to salvage the Netils Yadayim because of the bracha that he recited on the Netils Yadayim. Now, just by way of introduction, we could take a different approach and reject this Rashbam. Kiddush is not a hefsek. And even if he were to recite the Kiddush himself, it would not qualify as a Hesech Hadas. Why is that so? What would be the logic that underlies the opposite opinion, the dissenting view that dissents against this Rashbam? Why would Kiddush not be a hefsek between Netils Yadayim and Seudah?
We say that there is a rishus when you don't have wine to make Kiddush on the lechem itself.
So let's take the case where he's making Kiddush ala pas. If you look at the Gemara here, the next piece of the Gemara here on Kuvav and Beis, Amalahu Rav Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta, Akati lo noch nafshi derav, shachechinu l'shmaite. Rav is still alive, and we forgot what Rav himself holds. Zimnin Sagian, very often Avika Imna Kavi de Rav. Very often I was with Rav when he recited Kiddush. Zimnin de Chaviva of Rifto, Makadosh Rifto, Zimnin de Chaviva of Chamra, Makadosh Chamra. Often Rav was in the mood to eat the bread. Let's say he was very hungry, he was, as we would say, starving, and he preferred to eat the bread. Other times he wanted to drink the wine. He would make Kiddush frequently on Pas and frequently on Yayin. And therefore, the Gemara seems to be arguing now that if there's such an entity as Kiddush ala Pas, then why would, as Joe mentioned before, why would Netils Yadayim, followed by Kiddush, followed by the eating of the Pas, when he recited Kiddush ala Pas, after his Netils Yadayim, why would that be a hefsek? That's not a problem. The Kiddush itself is on the Pas. So now you have two entities or two powers, so to speak, that join forces and are both preparation for the eating of the Suda, the eating of the Pas. You've got the Netils Yadayim, which is required for every Pas, and now the Kiddush that you have to make on the Pas. So now everything is really on the Pas. The Netils Yadayim was for the sake of the Pas. The Kiddush was for the sake of the Achilas HaPas, because the Kiddush itself was ala Pas. And now there's no hefsek. And the Gemara seems to be advocating for the logic that Kiddush is not a hefsek. Not in the case of Kiddush al pas, at least. But maybe what the Gemara is implying is, if, oh no, I washed my hands and I didn't say Kiddush, the Gemara is implying that, you know what? Go ahead and make Kiddush al pas. Why do you have to get involved in this very complicated issue of whether or not Kiddush is a hefsek between the Netilas Yadayim and the Achilas HaPas? Why not just simply solve your problem by reciting Kiddush al pas? Change your approach. Initially, maybe you thought you were going to make Kiddush al Yayin. Now, make Kiddush al pas. Not necessarily because pas is chaviv, not necessarily because you were hungry and you were eager and anxious to eat the pas, but simply in order to salvage the Netilas Yadayim so that you don't have to require another Netilas Yadayim. But in truth, if this be the case, we may even be able to take it a step further. And we may even be able to suggest that you can wash, make Kiddush, and then Kiddush al Yayin and drink the Yayin. Because just like the Kiddush is a preparation for the Suda in the case of Kiddush al pas, and therefore the Kiddush al pas will integrate together with the Netilas Yadayim to form one entity comprised of two different elements, both of which are meant to serve as a machshir to set up your achilas hasuda. You can now extend that and include any Kiddush, even Kiddush al Yayin. And I think in the terminology that I'm familiar with in my upbringing, you would call it Shnei Matirim. What does that mean by Shnei Matirim? You're not allowed to eat the Suda before Kiddush. In fact, the Gemara in Pesachim has a suffix if you ate before Kiddush, whether you can make Kiddush at all. But Kiddush has to be b'makom Suda, and Kiddush has to be before the Suda. And just like you require Netilas Yadayim for a Suda when you eat the pas, so too you require Kiddush in order to allow you to eat the pas. And if that be the case, you have a tziruf, an integration of two matirim. Matir number one will call Netilas Yadayim. Matir number two will call Kiddush, because you can't eat without Kiddush. And therefore the two together integrate to form one halachic entity, all of which is meant to prepare for the achilas hasuda, the achilas hapas. And therefore Kiddush is not a hefsek. So basically, the shakla v'tarya in the Gemara back and forth is about whether or not Kiddush is a hefsek. L'chatchila, the Gemara thought, when they first quoted Rav Bruna in the name of Rav, that Kiddush is a hefsek. As the Rashbam points out, therefore you have to have somebody else recite the Kiddush. He cannot recite the Kiddush. That would be a hefsek, hesek hadas. But l'maskana, when the Gemara tells us that Kiddush can be al pas, which means that Kiddush is a preparation for the Suda, then we can apply that even to Kiddush al Yayin. And the Kiddush is a preparation for the Suda. We called it a matir. And therefore, he would not have to require that somebody else recite the Kiddush. He can recite the Kiddush himself, following his Netilas Yadayim, and the Kiddush would not be a problem. Immediately after Kiddush, he'll make Hamotzi al pas and begin his Suda. And you may be aware of the fact that in certain circles, particularly amongst the Yekis, the German Jews, they have this minhag. They wash. I'm talking not about Sukkot now. I'm talking about every Friday night. They wash before Kiddush. Then they recite Kiddush, they drink the wine, and they immediately cut the bread and make the hamotzi. And that minhag is based on the fact that the Gemara is rejecting Rav Bruna's understanding of Rav, because we have to reject that, because Rav himself would make Kiddush al pas. Okay, that's as far as the Gemara Pesachim is concerned. We're going to have to come back to this, again and again. But for now, I just want to move on to a very fascinating issue about Kiddush al Yayin. Here's the issue, And we'll see it here in the sugya in Shabbos on Daf Chav Gimel and Beis, which is the last sugya in my Chanukah, in the sugyas of Chanukah. So the sugya we're about to look at is very relevant to Chanukah, which is next week. And that is the following. A man has enough money for one of two mitzvahs that he's obligated in. For example, he's obligated on the Shabbos of Chanukah in the mitzvah of Ner Shabbos. He only has enough money to buy one Ner. He's also obligated to light a candle for Chanukah. Which mitzvah takes precedence? Is it the mitzvah of Ner Shabbos or the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah? He only has a pruta. He can only buy one of the two. And keep in mind, which is a separate discussion now for now, that you cannot use one Ner and, as we say, proverbially kill two birds with one stone. You can't use one Ner for both Ner Shabbos and Ner Chanukah. But leave that on the side. Then the Gemara goes on to ask another question. Well, what happens if you only have enough money for Ner Shabbos or Yayin for Kiddush? And then the Gemara finally asks a third question. What happens if you only have enough money for Yayin for Kiddush and for Ner Chanukah? So let's take a look at the Gemara for a moment on Daf Chaf Gimel Amid Beis, about 10 lines down from the top. Amar Rava Pshitoli. Rava says that there's one case that I have no doubt about. Ner Beiso v'Ner Chanukah, Ner Beiso Adif Mishum Shalom Bayis. If you had to choose between Ner Shabbos and Ner Chanukah on the Shabbos of Chanukah, sometimes the two Shabbos of Chanukah, what would you say intuitively should take precedence? Ner Shabbos or Ner Chanukah? Ner Chanukah of once a year. You only have one Chanukah each year. Shabbos you have every Shabbos. So now you have
Shabbos is
Ner
the
Shabbos,
Yoraisa, and Hanukkah is Rabbanan.
Shabbos is also Rabbanan. So you have two D'Rabbanans, and the question is, which D'Rabbanan would you prefer? You know, when I was a kid, the Federation, you've heard of the Federation. I mean, in Toronto, I think Federation is very big. The Federation that organized this last rally in Washington. The Federation took a poll in New York City amongst Jews in New York City. Which is more popular, Ner Shabbos or Ner Chanukah? What do you think was the final conclusion? What percentage of Jews in the city of New York, this is many years ago, would light Ner Shabbos, and what percent of Jews in the city of New York, in one form or another, lit Chanukah candles? When I say one form or another, you remember the electric Chanukiot, I don't know. I don't want to go down that way, whether that's a mitzvah of Ner Chanukah or not, but I don't want to tell you what tree was next to the Chanukiot in many cases. We're not going to go into that, but what do you think was the result? If I remember correctly, what?
More did Chanukah, I imagine, unfortunately.
I think it was 19% of New York Jews light Ner Shabbos, and 79% of the Jews in one form or another lit Ner Chanukah. The Ram at the end of Hilchos Chanukah calls Chanukah a mitzvah chaviva hi ad ma'od. So if you only have enough money to buy a Ner Shabbos or to buy a Ner Chanukah on Shabbos of Chanukah, what would you anticipate should take precedence? And which one of the two Neros should you be buying and therefore being Mekayim that mitzvah? What would you say? Chanukah. But the Gemara says Pugfakeh. The Gemara says that pshitali, it wasn't even a suffix in the mind of Rava that the mitzvah of Ner Shabbos is more important than the mitzvah of Chanukah. And why is that?
Can I ask you, I'm sorry, just a quick question with regards to that. Would you not say also the mitzvah of Shabbos, doesn't that come first?
You mean chronologically?
Well, yeah. If you have mitzvahs in front of you, the only question comes up: if you have them, if they come to you at the same time, then you have to decide which one you would do first, right? Which one you would do even. But if you only have the one mitzvah in front of you first, and mitzvahs of Shabbos, would you not say that that's really before the mitzvah?
Joe,
of
you
Hanukkah?
remind me of a famous psak of the Rav Shulchan Aruch, the Alter Rebbe. A woman forgot to light Ner Shabbos at taunt. Now it's Shabbos already. And again, I don't know. I can't go into this now. He allows a guy to light the Ner Shabbos on Shabbos, and it could be that she can even make the brach on the Ner. Again, I'm not going into this now. I didn't prepare that. I'm just telling you from the recesses of my memory, a famous breakthrough tshuva of the Alter Rebbe. And the reason for that is because really Ner Shabbos is a mitzvah on Shabbos. Because Ner Shabbos is Oneg Shabbos, and that's on Shabbos. Again, we can't actually do the Maisa Adlaka on Shabbos because it's a Meleches Havara, but the mitzvah per se, in a conceptual sense, is defined as a mitzvah on Shabbos, which is the same time he's Chayav and Chanukah. Again, in terms of the Bitzua, what we call the implementation, obviously Ner Shabbos is going to have to come earlier. But then you're getting into another issue, and when is Ner Chanukah obligatory? And it could be that on Shabbos of Chanukah, they were masake in a takana that the mitzvah Ner Chanukah starts at the same time as the mitzvah Ner Shabbos. So I would submit to you that Mimon Efshach, both mitzvahs are chal b'vasachas simultaneously. But why does Ner Shabbos trump Ner Chanukah if he only has enough money for one? The Gemara says that Shalom Beso Adif. And a lot of people, I think, misinterpret the concept of Shalom Beso with regard to Ner Shabbos. I don't think it means, a happy, harmonious marriage. I think Shalom Beso means that the bias itself needs light. Otherwise, every time you walk into something, you trip and fall. Okay, now we have another statement of Rava that's also pshitoli. Ner Beso v'Kiddush Hayom. You have a choice between the mitzvah of Ner Shabbos, which, as you pointed out, Bruce, is only D'Rabbanan, and the mitzvah of Kiddush al Yayin, which apparently is only D'Rabbanan. That's what we want to get into. And the Gemara again establishes that Pshita Li, Rava had no doubts about this, that Ner Beso Adif Mishum Shola Beso. So he's going to have to waive, or how should I say, give up on the mitzvah of Yayin for Kiddush in favor of Ner Beso. And then Rava says, but I do have a suffix, I vacillate back and forth about Ner Chana and Kiddush Hayom, which takes precedence. Until finally, although Ner Shabbos is Tadir, and usually Tadir, V'Shein Tadir is Tadir Kola, but here in this case, Ner Chanukah is Adif Mishum Persume Nisa. So Ner Chanukah is jacked up one separate level, and it has the status of an upgraded mitzvah d'Rabbanan. What upgrades it to that higher level? Persume Nisa. Okay, if we're learning about Chanukah, we'd have to learn about Persume Nisa, what that is. But the Gemara puts Ner Chanukah on a very high level. And now the Rishonim ask the following kasha. And this kasha you'll see in the Ran, in Perik Vamem Adlikin, on this sugya that we saw in Chav Gimel. And the kasha is, the Rashba also seems to imply this kasha in his Chuvas Rashba. How could it be that Ner Shabbos would trump Kiddush al Yayin? How could it be that Ner Chanukah would trump Kiddush al Yayin when Kiddush al Yayin is Doraisa? And many Rishonim derive the conclusion, amongst them the Rashba, that Kiddush al Yayin is only D'Rabbanan. Otherwise, the Gemara makes no sense. Because if you had a choice between a mitzvah shel Torah and a mitzvah D'Rabbanan, and it's an either-or situation, there's no question about it, you would have to prefer the mitzvah Doraisa. Hence, the Rashba derives the conclusion that Zochrei ol Yayin is only D'Rabbanan. And not only that, Rav would often make Kiddush al Apas. Now, if Kiddush al Yayin is Doraisa, with all the respect to Chavivus of Apas, how could you possibly give up on a mitzvah Doraisa of Kiddush al Yayin, as we saw Tosfos quotes two psukim to prove that Zachar is al Yayin, for the sake of Ner Beso? for the sake of their Hanukkah, these are mitzvahs d'Rabbanan. And therefore, the Rashba concludes, quoting also Rabbeinu Tam in Nazir, that v'chibush b'aviyovim arsina, you read it with a question mark, meaning the Torah never required yayin. So therefore, yayin for Kiddush is only d'Rabbanan, says the Rashba. Hence, the Gemara will compare and weigh on a scale the mitzvah d'Rabbanan of Kiddush al yayin with the mitzvah d'Rabbanan of Ner Shabbos, the mitzvah d'Rabbanan of Ner Chanukah. And this makes perfect sense. Comes along the Ran, and without mentioning the Rashba, he goes in a different path. And the Ran says, the whole kasha of Yayin is Doraisa is not a kasha because he has pas. Enochinami, the Rashba implies that, bye-bye, Bruce, that if you only had Yayin and you didn't have pas, then there's no question about it. You would have to spend your money on buying Yayin because Yayin is Doraisa against the Rashba. So it's amazing. Two Rishonim from what we call Chachmei Sfarad that looked at the same Gemara and they came to two opposite conclusions. The Rashba understood that the Gemara must be assuming that Kiddush on Yayin is the Rabbanon. Hence, we can compare it and weigh it on a scale together with other mitzvahs, the Rabbanon, Ner Shabbos, and Ner Chanukah. The Ran understood, no, Kiddush al Yayin is Doraisa. If so, then certainly Kiddush al Yayin should trump these, the Rabbanons of Ner Shabbos and Ner Chanukah. The answer is he has pas. No, if he has pas, so what's the issue? Why did the Gemara vacillate? Why is there a pressing need for Yayin? And apparently, says the Ran, Kiddush al Yayin is adifa. What does it mean, adifa? It's like a mitzvah min muvchar. If all things are equal and you have a choice between two alternatives, Yayin and pas, then opt for Yayin. He doesn't tell you exactly why. I would have to assume because of the principle of Ein Shira El Al Yayin, whenever we're singing a song of praise to Hashem, we do it Al Yayin, or because of the equation between Kiddush Al Yayin and Nisuch HaYayin. You may know that the Rambam, this could be a separate topic for us, the Rambam disqualifies Yayin for Kiddush if that Yayin is disqualified for Nisuch Al Gabi Mizbeach. But in any event, there are some elements in Yayin that give it preference, and they make the mitzvah into a mitzvah in a muvchar, even though he's going to make Kiddush al pas. The Gemara says that we're going to waive the mitzvah in a muvchar, the adifus of Yayin, for the sake of what? Of Ner Chanukah, Ner Shabbos. So these two mitzvahs, Ner Shabbos and Ner Chanukah, are both upgraded mitzvahs. It's not like any other mitzvah d'Rabbanan. We have many mitzvahs d'Rabbanan. You know, you could talk about Eruvin is a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. You could talk about Lulav Kol Shiva, and you could talk about Netilas Yadayim and so forth and so on. But there are two mitzvahs in the constellations of d'Rabbanan that have special malyusa, that have special chashivus. Ner Shabbos because of Shalom Bayis, Ner Chanukah because of pursuing Nisa, and as a result, we're going to trump the mitzvah min hamuvchar of Yayin, which is Doraisa. And the Gemara was vacillating about this because maybe a mitzvah min hamuvchar in a Doraisa is greater than a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. And the Gemara says, Einam Chinami. If it was a normal, shall we say, rank and file citizen d'Rabbanan, then it would trump the mitzvah d'Rabbanan, because we want a mitzvah muvchar on a d'Oraisa level. But because these d'Rabbanans are special d'Rabbanans, they each one have a couple of stars, whether it's Shalom Bayis, whether it's Persume Nisa. Therefore, we're gonna be mavater, we're gonna waive and give up on the mitzvah min hamuvchar, the adifus of Yayin over pas, for the sake of a mitzvah which is so upgraded and so significant that it's Shalom Bayis or Persume Nisa. So the Rashba L'shitaso, and he quotes Rabbeinu Tam, is of the opinion that Kiddush al Yayin is D'Rabbanan. The Ran L'shitaso holds that Kiddush al Yayin is Doraisa. One wonders if Kiddush al Yayin is Doraisa, then why would Rav make Kiddush al pas? And we said that Kiddush al Yain is Doraisa Lishitasam because of the pasuk Zachar Yom Shabbos Lekadsha, and the word Zachar means Yain. Where does pas fit in? And B'docha Gadol, we have no choice really. We're going to have to assume that when the Torah wants Kiddush al Yain, because that's the way that you are Kovea Su'uda. You could be Kovea Su'uda al Yain. And that's going to be the issue of Moli Lugmav that we'll get to next time. No, if the whole point of Kiddush al Yain is to be Kovea Su'uda, as we said, we want to set up a machshir or a matir for the Su'uda through Kiddush, and therefore we call Yain in the Kiddush, then Pas is another way of setting up a Su'uda Shabbos. So Kiddush al Pas, no less than Kiddush al Yain, is Kiddush al Suda. So the connection that the Torah wants to make between the Kiddush and the Suda can be achieved in one of two ways: either to be Kovea your Kiddush al Yain or al Pas. And now we get to the Tosas Rid in Nazir. Now it's interesting. I don't know enough of the history here, but Rashi wrote a work that's very rarely quoted. It's called Pardes, Sefer Pardes. Now there are new publications of the Sefer Pardes with extensive footnotes, but as I said before, it's a rarely quoted Sefer. The Tosas Rid of all the Rishonim is going to quote extensively from Rashi's work called the Sefer HaPardes. And he says the following. So again, we'll look at the Tosas Rid in Masechta Nazir, in the first parak of Nazir, on Daf Gimel Amid Beis. He writes, Matzasi l'shlosha mefarshim. Now, Shlosha mefarshim doesn't name the Rishonim who he's referring to, but apparently there were three Rishonim, Shepirshu, that interpret She'ein Nazirus Chal Yayin V'Kiddush V'Avdolah, V'Neshu Mushba V'Yomer Sinai. So they read Mushba V'Yomer Sinai with an exclamation mark, not with a question mark. V'chein kosav gam ha-moreh, moreh is a reference to Rashi, v'pardes. And now, he has a long quote from Rashi in Sefer HaPardes. The hadis han yizochas yom shabbos l'kadsh l'zachrei l'yayin v'knisaso lav dafka yayin elahu adinami al pas yoch l'kadsh v'yorcha de milsa nokat yayin ha'mesabeach elukim v'anoshim. So people would normally want to make Kiddush al yayin even though they have another choice, another alternative of making Kiddush al pas. And the reason why they prefer yayin is because yayin is misameach elukim v'yonam. Afilu im nodur hu me'erev Shabbos shelo lechol. Yochel l'kadish al pas v'lechol the age shvuah v'toch shvuah v'mushpa v'yomer asinu she'ikadish. V'ein Kiddush el b'meshu kovea su'dosam. Sounds like what we discussed earlier. O b'pas o b'yayin t'chsiv v'karosel l'shabbos oneg, a pasuk in Yeshayahu and Navi Nunches. And we darshan it as b'mokum kriya. Kriya means Kiddush. Shamte oneg. That's where the Suda is. If he took a neder that enjoins him from drinking wine or eating the pas, he will violate that neder because of the mitzvah of Kiddush. V'chein matzinu, Rashi goes on and quotes the Gemara Nazir, there be no some Nazir chayv kiddush hayom lishtos me'achash kiddush b'yayin. That the mitzvah of kiddush b'yayin trumps the Isur Dorais of Nazir. And apparently it means that Mushpa v'yomim arsinai kepshuto, and therefore there's a requirement d'oraisa to recite Kiddush al Yain. Okay, he says that this is dechuya and not hutra. That means let the nazir opt for pas for kiddush al pas, because he has that option, rather than drink wine and violate his nazirs. Again, if not for this Rashi, we would have said a hutra, that the neder of naziris is not chal at all in the case of kiddush al yain. V'im ein lenazir pas yikadish b'yayin lechatchila v'yishte. The ein naziris chala. Oh, now he says hutra. V'chein lemisha neder al pas im ein lo yayin yikadish al pas. If he took a neder not to eat pas and he doesn't have the option of reciting kiddush al yayin, he has no yayin, he will recite kiddush al pas. The ein chiluk bein pas liyayin lin kiddush. Ad kan dvar. End of quote of Rashi in the Paradise. Lefi divrei haGemara divrei haParshanim ha'elu muchach the hodesadi zochrei al yayin and atorahu lekadesh al yayin. And now the Tosfos Rid is addressing the famous question: where does it say in the Torah that you have to recite kiddush al yayin? Vushte. Tosfos worked very hard with two psukim, one for Moshe, one for Shir Shirim, to try to prove that zechira equals yayin. Says the Tosfos Rid, he doesn't validate that Tosfos, and therefore he says, Afa gavzlo ksiv yayin v'kra, kach kivel Moshe v'Sinai, ditzarach lekadosh al yayin. Whoa. In my mind, before I saw this Tosfos Rid, I thought that in order to quote halacha of Moshe v'Sinai, you have to have a source in the Talmud. The Gemara has to say halacha of Moshe v'Sinai. The Gemara says that Arlin Chutzlar, it says halacha Moshe v'Sinai, and lulav and esrog halacha Moshe. There are many things that halacha Moshe v'Sinai, but where does it say anywhere in Shas that kiddush al yayin is halacha Moshe v'Sinai? And who says such a thing? Tosfos Rid. In my mind, I picture a student in Rav Soloveitchik's class, and Rav Soloveitchik asked the question: how do we know that kiddush is al yayin midoraisa? So one kid will yell, "Oh, it's Allah Moshina." The Rav would probably throw him out of Shia. Who told you that's Allah Moshina? But you see that Tosfos Rid was in a bind, because Rashi in Sefer HaParadis and other Rishonim understood the Gemara Nazik Kipshuto Mushba V'Yomi Sinai. So where Mushba V'Yomi Sinai, and Har Sinai, there was a shvua that you have to drink the wine of Kiddush, and that trumps the Yisur Naziros. The answer is, it was halacha l'Moshe Sinai. He has no other choice. He doesn't recognize and validate Tosfos's, trip through Tanakh and let's find psukim and all. That's not reliable. Fascinating, no? So again, when we line up the shittas, we have a number of shittas and Rishonim that kiddush al yayin is doraisa. We've got the Mefarish in Nazir, we have Rashi in Brachos, we have one day in Tosfos in Psachim, and one day of Tosfos in Nazir, and Tosfos tries to find a pasuk for Yayin. And now we have the Ran in the Sugya of Ner Shabbos, Ner Chanukah trumping Yayin, because, as the Ran, he already has pas, and he's going to be kind of the mitzvah doraisa of Yayin, of Kiddush al Yayin with pas. All these Rishonim, it's not like, one Rishon here and there, and they all seem to maintain that Kiddush al Yayin is doraisa. And it goes so far as the Tosfos Rid, after quoting the long tshuva of Rashi and Pardes, to say that it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Pretty much a pella.
I'm sorry, Rav. The concept of Kiddush is doraisa, we know that, and the idea of yayin being a vehicle of doing a vehicle of something is also, we know that's a doraisa as well, right?
According to that school of thought. Otherwise, we assume most Rishonim, Yayin is only D'Rabbanan. The Rabbanan made a takana that you have to recite Kiddush al Yayin.
But that Yayin is a vehicle to mekadesh something. Does not everybody? I mean, we're saying we're saying that it's together, like one thing. Kiddush Alayan is. Why can't you say, because we know that Kiddush is Doraisa, and we know that Yayin is the best vehicle, so therefore it's not necessarily a Darabanan.
But when you say it's the best vehicle, it's only a best vehicle because the Rabbanan established it as such. I mean, we find Yayin in Mizrach Yayin, but that's not an act of Kiddush. We might find Yayin in terms of perhaps other mitzvahs like Shira al Yayin and so forth. But as far as Kiddush is concerned, where does Yayin come in? It's only a Darabanan. But they want to insist that it's Doraisa. And they're going to learn it from Psukim and Tanakh or from Allah.
So you wouldn't be able to, you can't say that because Yayin is our best vehicle, so it automatically gets magnetized to the Kiddush, not necessarily that it's, okay.
I don't know. It's nice to call it a best vehicle. I mean, you buy a Ferrari, it's a best vehicle, but I don't know that Yayin is the best vehicle for Kiddush. Now, it's interesting. There's a Chidushei Rashba in that sugya of Shabbos Chav Gimel, which is Adif, Yayin or Ner, and the Rashba there assumes that Kiddush al Yayin is Doraisa, which is unbelievable because the Rashba himself wrote a tshuva in which he establishes that Kiddush Doraisa is only Dibur, it's Divrei Sheva for Kilus, and we saw this in the past. The Rashba seems to contradict himself. In the Rashba, when he tries to explain why the Gemara thinks that the mitzvah of Ner Shabbos would trump Yayin for Kiddush, he says because he has pas, just like we saw in the Ran. But if he didn't have pas, then clearly he would be involved in a mitzvah Doraisa. I would suspect, again, I don't know if anybody says this, that when the Rashba in his Chidushim says that certainly Kiddush Doraisa al Yayin would trump Ner Shabbos, Ner Chanukah, he's referring to the fact that when the Rabbanan established Yayin, they were telling us what's the ideal way of fulfilling Kiddush. So it's not just a regular Rabbanan. You're right. It's a Takana Rabbanan. Midoraisa, as the Rashba says in Chuvas, you could be Yotzei Kiddush without Yain. All you need is Amira and Shevach for Kilus. But once the Rabbanan established Yain, they are telling you what is the best way to fulfill the mitzvah d'oraisa of Kiddush. And therefore, it would certainly trump any other mitzvah d'Rabbanan. In any event, we want to end the shir with a chiddush here of the Baal Pri Megadim. The Pri Megadim, who's most famous for his commentary on Shulchan Aruch, also wrote a sefer of commentary on Shas. It's called the Rosh Yosef. And in the Rosh Yosef, in that sugya in Shabbos that we keep referring to on Daf Chav Gimel, he brings the Ran and the Rashba, and he says that Ein kavanasam shekiddush al yain al pasu mitzvah doraisa el Torah sagi v'amira stam. Umikol makom svirole de kiddush al yain chamor mishal beso upersume nisa kevan de ikar chiyuvo min Torah. So since yain is a drabanan which reflects on the kiyum doraisa of kiddush, and in the language of the Rosh Yosef, which you'll see here on the left column on page Kuf Nun Gimel, he says that Kiddush Hayom al Yayin Adif to Ispe Lasa D'Oraisa. I would say that the word Lasa, which literally translates as Shaychus, means a Kiyum D'Oraisa. So even though it's the Rabbanon, nevertheless it has a Kiyum D'Oraisa. So therefore it comes out, according to the Pri Megadim, that if he doesn't have Pas, then certainly he would spend that Pruta on Yayin, and that would trump the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah, because the mitzvah of Yayin in Kiddush is Ispe Lasa De'oraisa. Now let's just mention And we've spoken about this in the past, that according to the Magen Avram, you could be Yotzei Kiddush and Tefillah. I mean, that's going to be problematic, as the Dogel Mervava of the Noda B'Yehuda points out, when he comes home after Ma'ariv and he wants to recite Kiddush for his wife, because she's chayav on a Doraisa level, Zocher v'shomer b'diborech kol sheyesh lo b'schira yesh lo b'shmir yesh lo b'schira, and he's only chayav d'Rabbanan because he was Yotzei according to Magen Avram in Tefillah. So that's going to be a serious problem. But in any event, we see clearly that you could be Yotzei the mitzvah Kiddush Doraisa without Yayin. And basically, the Magen Avram is really reflecting a very major school of Rishonim, including the Balei HaTosfos, that hold that Kiddush Midoraisa, and that's we saw in the Rashba and Shuva, we saw it in the Rambam, is only Amiras Shevach V'Kilus, which is Yotzei with Amir Dibur. He doesn't require Yayin. And the entire entity of Yayin is only D'Rabbanan. Now again, whether or not you're going to be Yotzei Kiddush Doraisa in Tefillah, as the Magen Avram says you will, that's really going to depend on Mitzvah Strichas Kavana. Because when a person davens Ma'ariv in Shul on Friday night, clearly he doesn't have Kavana to be Yotzei the mitzvah of Kiddush. He knows that he's going home, he's going to recite Kiddush al Yayin. His Kavana is to be Yotzei the mitzvah of Tefillah. Now, if a person in one action could fulfill both the mitzvah of Tefillah and the mitzvah of Kiddush, would you say that he could have Kavana for both and kill two birds with one stone? I don't know. That's an interesting question. Okay, then now next Wednesday is Erev Chanukah, is it not? Chanukah, I believe, is next Thursday night. So maybe we'll try to integrate our discussion about Kiddush with a discussion about Chanukah, and we'll pick it up next week. We'll see how it happens. So let me wish you a great week, and as we say here in Israel, Shenishma b'sarot tovim. Thank you so much.